First off, thanks to Andy Strider for letting me use his cover of Sonate in the intro. Check it out below. Getting into the task at hand, we have the Fostech Echo Sport binary trigger, an attempt at intensifying the interdigitation of man and machine. And well, it does kind of do that, with some major caveats. Full disclosure, I have no relationship with Fostech, and I paid my own money, just over $200, for this trigger on sale. And I believe that makes it one of the cheaper, if not the cheapest binary triggers on the market. At this point in time, I have been using it for months and months and have put many thousands of rounds on it, so I should be able to accurately relay pertinent information on the function of the device. First, some basics on the trigger itself. It being a binary trigger means you will get a hammer fall on both the pull and release of the trigger. These are of course two separate motions of the trigger and therefore constitute one round per action of the trigger. In theory, this should double your natural rate of pull, but not quite. In reality, due to some quirky mechanics and effects we'll talk about shortly, it's really more about 70% faster. The Echo Sport being the cheaper version of the other Fostech devices means that you do have some drawbacks. The first being that the installation is much more complex and annoying. It took me some time to get the hang of it and to actually get it working properly. Also, changing the device from one lower to another is extremely tedious, especially if the tiny captured pieces become uncaptured. Well, it quickly turns into a nightmare of small pieces and tiny springs. So just know that installation and transfer is extremely annoying, but you save about $100 if that's worth it to you. Refer to Fostech's videos for direct help with those aspects. That's not what this video is about. Another downside or side grade is that rather than have 3 positions on your safety, you have 2 positions, safe and fire, and then you have a paddle on the trigger itself that can be switched from normal to echo. At this point in time, it can be pretty easily bumped from echo to normal, but not from regular to echo, so I guess that's sort of a good thing.
Oh, that's funny. It bounced over into solo mode.
Talking about the trigger dynamics, you have a very stiff, gritty pull of about 10 pounds. The trigger is a lot more complex, so I imagine that weight is something you just have to deal with. In normal mode, the reset is very long, but positive, and in echo mode, the long reset rewards you with another hammer drop. Overall, I would say that the trigger is like a bad mil-spec trigger, though nothing horrendous. Double tapping in echo mode is extremely easy to do, and in the right system you can keep 2-round bursts on target out to a couple hundred yards, but most people aren't just using it for 2-round bursts. Now let's talk about the important part, actually using the thing. This goes down to PAS, the serious application which takes a lot more time and thought, and the fun application which is pretty simple. If you only want to dispense projectiles faster, yes, this will do that. A little bit of a learning curve, but you will be able to mag them faster, and it is fun. But now let's move on to the more serious application. Volume of fire, suppression, and overwhelming force are effective ways to move, engage, disengage, and support your team. I am not a tactics guy, but there are a lot of Ottoman that are. Check out Red Right Hand and others for ways to effectively utilize the higher output these can give you. Now talking about how the Echo Sport does that. It's a little tricky. With proper technique and timings, you can increase your rate of fire by about 70%. However, getting to that level of proficiency with the Echo is going to take time. I often have people comment about how consistent I can get the Echo to run, and that can only be achieved by taking the time, energy, and money to get good with it. You may see a lot of good bursts and fantastic strings of fire, but you don't see the stuttering bursts, the malfunctions, and the timing issues that can be self-induced. I have gotten to where I'm at with it now, which is really only about 90 to 95% efficient through many thousands of rounds of live fire. And this isn't something you can train via dry fire. Getting the pull and release down pat is going to take time and money. Also very important to note is that your system that you implement this in is of the utmost importance. If you're swapping uppers, cans, or something else in the system, you're going to throw your timings off. I have tested this in a lot of different uppers and a couple lowers, different setups, all sorts of different fun stuff. Lowers don't matter that much, but the upper timings are different on a 14.5 midi suppressed versus a 20-inch rifle with a different suppressor on it. If you want to use this effectively in a serious application, you need to train with it, number 1, and number 2, you need to keep that system as consistent as possible, and that will let you be as consistent as possible. Something to note is that in echo mode, you can go from a rapid rate of projectile dispensation to a slower, more controlled rate of fire, but you need to be very cognizant of that pull and release firing schedule. But there's still more to get to. One issue with the Echo device is that upon emergency reloads with the bolt locked to the rear, my trigger would not reset until I had fully depressed the trigger and let the trigger out. Letting the trigger back out would get me a hammer drop, something to be very, very aware of. Speaking of being aware, there were times when the system would get dirty and the reset would be gritty and slow, meaning that you could potentially think you got reset and to fire because you let go of the trigger, but then 0.1 seconds later, you actually get the hammer fall, resulting in a round going where you didn't want it to. The Echo Sport is another potential failure point and something you need to lube and maintain. Now in Echo mode, if you pull the trigger but do not want to fire that second shot upon release, you would need to bring your support hand back with the trigger still depressed and switch the paddle from Echo back to normal. Then you can let go of the trigger and it would reset like normal. So can you effectively increase your rate of fire? Yes, but even if you, the user, were perfect in your operation, there are still times when the system or trigger may fail you, and you need to be aware of how that might occur. It feels great to go from about 400 rounds per minute to 700, 750 rounds per minute. But on the flip side of that, sometimes you'll go from 400 rounds a minute down to 0 if you or the system makes a mistake. Talking about one of the very nice design safeties that's built into the trigger is that the hammer cannot drop until the bolt is fully seated because of the safety on the trigger itself. When your auto cut bolt fully seats, it will compress the safety and allow the hammer to drop, which is very important. Now, if you are maintaining the system, you will need to compress the hammer safety when pinning the upper and lower together to get them to fit. Now, personally, if I were going to employ this in a serious application, how would I run it? It would probably be in some sort of heavier build, not necessarily like a full IAR or something like that, but something that can take the extra heat and still maintain accuracy. But to be honest, if I had this in some sort of serious application, 90+% of the time, I would leave it in a normal mode and only switch to Echo when the circumstances call for it. So even in a more serious application, it is a very, very niche product. In normal mode, it's a mediocre trigger, but still usable. Then again, when the need arises, you can literally flip the switch and increase your rate of fire. Now, all of this may be a moot point. If FRTs and similar come back in force, then those will be better options. I have a Watt and it is much simpler to use with the major downside of not being able to fire a singular round at will, but we'll talk more on that later. Is it fun? Yes. Is it practical? No. For 99.99% of people, just get good with your main rifle, and if you need a higher volume system, then you may want to look at other options. But with all that out of the way, guys, let me know what you think of the Fostech Echo Sport in the comments down below. And with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. God bless.